This video is sponsored by Best Buy and the new HP Spectre Fold. Procreate is a drawing app that's been around for about 10 years now. And in that time, it has taken the illustration world by storm. Many illustrators who used to draw in Photoshop now draw in Procreate, but I think there are still a lot of things that the folks over at Procreate can learn from Adobe, and that is what we're talking about today. Hello, my name is Brad. I review tech for creative professionals, and one of the things I have seen over the years through your comments as I've been covering Procreate and its evolution is people requesting certain features. A lot of you are probably wondering, what computer is that? This is the new HP Spectre foldable PC. It was sent to me by today's video's sponsor, Best Buy. Now check this out. This is a 17-inch Windows tablet that can fold over. Honestly, this part never gets old. It's thin, it's lightweight, I can carry it around. I've used a lot of Windows tablets, but nothing with a screen this big. So if I set it up like this, I can snap on the included wireless keyboard magnetically and boop, look at this. You got a full-blown 12.3-inch laptop. Keys and trackpad feel good, touchscreen included, and that keyboard can pull down, giving you more screen real estate. You can use some of that space for another browser window, maybe your music player, even a little place to take notes or sketch. But my favorite orientation, I pop out the back kickstand and turn this into an all-in-one PC that I can take anywhere. Instant mobile workstation. There's so many nice little touches on this thing. The keyboard charges magnetically when you snap it into place. The MPP pen that comes along in the box also recharges along the side of the device. And the display itself is a 2.5K OLED display. It looks fantastic. This is a PC that not only folds its screen, but bends your imagination thanks to the Intel Evo platform powered by a 12th gen Intel Core processor and a fast charging all-day battery. Get your hands on HP's first ever 3-in-1 foldable PC now at bestbuy.com. There are a limited number of these in the stores, but you can order it anytime you want over on Best Buy's website. So check out my link down below in the description. So let's start with feature number one, more wet paint tools similar to what we see in Adobe Fresco. Adobe Fresco has some really cool brushes. They call them their live brushes. And basically how this works is if you take, say, a watercolor brush and you paint on the canvas with it, you can see the water spreading out across the canvas, very similar to what you might see if you were using an actual watercolor brush on paper. And there's some extra features in there as well. For example, I could add water to my canvas. So then when I use the brush again, it's going to bleed out differently than it would be on the drier parts of the canvas. And then you could actually dry out your canvas and add layers of watercolor effects on top of that. These are really cool brushes. And a lot of you have said, I would love to see these kind of effects come to Procreate. And while Procreate has done some pretty cool things with some of their brushes and in their engine, they haven't quite reached this level yet. And so that's why this one's on the list. Number two, I'm calling a more universal file format. This is something that Adobe has done really well. In fact, something Adobe doesn't get a lot of credit for is what they've done with file management in Creative Cloud. If I save a file in Photoshop, I can open it up in Fresco. By default, everything in Fresco is saved to that same folder, so I can go and grab it on the desktop. Procreate kind of exists in its own world. That may be changing soon with the future release of Procreate Dreams, their animation app, which is looking pretty darn cool. But right now, a Procreate file can only be opened in Procreate. And as cool of an app as Procreate is, if I'm creating an illustration and I need to use it on a website or I need to use it in like a printed card or something like that, what am I going to do with it? I'm going to physically export that file as a Photoshop file in order to use it in Photoshop or an Adobe app or even like an Affinity Designer or an app like that to export it and add my text and do all that stuff and get it ready for print. Right now, if you go into the settings of Procreate, you actually have the ability to cloud save this to different services, so you could open up your Procreate files. But since nothing can open a Procreate file other than Procreate, that's not really useful. I think having the ability to say when you're done using a file, have that create a PSD of that file and upload that to the cloud automatically would make everybody's life, at least my life, a whole lot easier. Number three is a big request, rulers. This is something that most Adobe programs already have. And Procreate has done some really cool things with grids and symmetry and that sort of thing, and a release that came out a few years ago. But rulers are still one of those things we don't quite have yet. And figuring out a way to get that in some of those grid tools would be really helpful. Number 4 is non-destructive adjustment layers. What the heck is that? So in Photoshop, you can go to a layer and you can add an adjustment. For example, you can add a drop shadow. You can emboss things. You can add all sorts of effects to a layer. But what's key about this is that when you're done with that effect, or if that effect doesn't work or isn't working down the road, you can just toggle it off. This means it's non-destructive. So if you draw on a layer and add a filter to it, you're not going to actually hurt your core art. In Procreate, when you're doing color adjustments and that sort of thing, you do. Now, I think the good news here is that playing around with Procreate Dreams, they do have this kind of feature built into Dreams. And they did say that some of the things that are happening in Dreams in terms of the engine and the features that they're developing for that will find their way into the core version of Procreate. So that is exciting. So that is something that we might see in the future, but I find that that is very high on a lot of people's wish lists. This is number 5 on my list, but this is number 1 in the requests that I have seen in the comments. And this is all about more vector tools. And I think this is an area where I have always kind of taken a step back and thought maybe not, because when you start adding vector tools, you start adding complexity to the app that isn't there, and you might lose some of the simplicity that makes Procreate so cool. But in some ways, Procreate has already kind of dabbled a little bit in vector shapes. If you draw a smart object, for example, if you draw a circle and hold your pen at the end of that circle, it will snap into an ellipse or a circle type shape. And it gives you some vector points that lets you resize that shape. You could do the same things with squares, same things with triangles. But as soon as you let go of that shape and you set that shape, it is no longer vector. You lose all of that information and it just becomes part of your canvas. And I think this is the area where people would like to see Procreate do a little bit more, like make that non-destructive. So if you draw some shapes, you can keep those shapes. For example, if you're creating squares that you want to use as like comic book panels, allowing users to go back in and edit those after the fact would be a real big time saver. I've always kind of been on the fence here, but I think I'm leaning towards the more, let's see what we could do with vectors, because I think they're already leaning that way. Number 6, I'm gonna go with smart objects. So in Photoshop, there's this concept of a smart object. Say I take a logo and I paste it into my design, and that logo takes up most of the page. I can convert that to a smart object, and it's basically going to remember that large size of the image. So what that lets me do is that lets me shrink the logo way down and position it anywhere I want on the design. But if I decide later that I want that logo to be bigger, or the client says, make that logo bigger, I can scale it up without that logo getting blurry, which is what pretty much every graphics program does. If you scale anything up, you're going to lose resolution, it's going to get blurry, it's going to get pixelated. There's another benefit in here that kind of wraps up with smart objects, and I'm not sure how to describe it because it's not a feature necessarily, it's just a way that Photoshop works. If I take that smart object and I drag it off the canvas so only like say half of it is showing, in Photoshop, I can always take that object and move it back onto the canvas, no problem. In Procreate, if you have an image on your canvas, you drag it off your canvas or part of it off your canvas, and then later on you drag it back on your canvas. Whatever was off your canvas is now lost data, lost information. In Photoshop, if you take a photo that is bigger than your canvas, it still saves the information that is outside of your canvas. Now, I think the reason that Procreate loses any data that is off the canvas is because it was originally limited on iPads by how much RAM was available to the app. And if back in the day they had allowed things to go off the canvas, that means the number of pixels they needed to save to memory at any given time would be higher than they wanted to, thus forcing them to reduce the number of layers available to the user at any given time. It was a trade-off, but now that we've gotten into the realm of M1, M2 processors, plenty of RAM, the ability to use the actual storage on the iPad as like backup memory, all that's available now. So I think we can move on and do some cooler things. And we have seen the ability to move things off canvas again in Procreate Dreams, and who knows, maybe we'll see that come over to Procreate as well. I would love to see that feature. Number 7, this is another two-parter. Being able to put a clipping mask on a group. And this is something that a lot of people said, but also people have said they want to be able to apply effects to a group as well. So if you wanted to adjust an alpha of all the layers, you could do that on a group level, not just one object at a time. Being able to apply a clipping mask to the entirety of the group, so then you can nest things inside that group after you've built the clipping mask, would be a big time saver. Those are the sort of things that you could do pretty easily in Photoshop and a lot of Adobe apps. We don't have that yet in Procreate. I'd love to see that. This one I was a little on the fence on. Number 8, we're gonna go with font management. And the reason why is Adobe is so good at this. This is one of those areas that you just kind of forget what fonts were like before Adobe had Typekit. I install Adobe Creative Cloud on a lot of different devices that I am testing. And what happens automatically is it remembers what fonts I had on my device, and it just pulls them down onto my new device when I'm setting it up. So if I'm using Premiere or I'm using Photoshop, my fonts are there. I used to have to save fonts in a folder and install them, and it was a big pain in the butt. It's so much easier now. Procreate does have, with its text tool, the ability to import fonts. The font can be on your iPad somewhere, and you can just import it and it installs it for you. And that's about the extent of it, but I think they could push that a little bit further. A lot of other drawing and painting apps have done things like they'll give you access to a free library of fonts or Google Fonts or something like that. And when you select a font, it'll download that specific font, install it on your iPad on the go, and then you could use it. And that's a great way to kind of expand that library without having to do all the work of licensing all the premium fonts that Adobe does. The reason I'm on the fence about this is Procreate is not really a design tool, it's an illustration tool. So that kind of pushes away from their core competency a little bit. I almost never use fonts in Procreate. I almost always design something in Procreate and then pull it into another app to do that sort of thing because it's just more robust and easier and faster. So I'm kind of on the fence about this one, but I have heard from a lot of people that this would be an area where it'd be cool to have an upgrade. Lastly, but not leastly, number 10 is the ability to use Procreate on the desktop. This actually wasn't as highly requested as make Procreate available for Android. That was way higher on the list, but several people mentioned this, and I think it makes sense. It makes sense and it doesn't make sense. Let me explain. A lot of iPad apps now natively run on M1, M2, and hopefully in the future M3 Macs. Procreate has not opted to port itself over to Macs yet, and I think the main reason why is there's no like Apple Pencil support, there's no touch support. It just wouldn't be a really great user experience on the Mac. So if I was going to be using Procreate on the Mac, yes, I might be using it with some drawing tablets if they have touch capabilities, but the main thing I'd be using it for is taking my Procreate files and turning them into something else or exporting them to use in other programs. You put together some Procreate file sharing cloud storage thing between Procreate Dreams, the desktop app, and the iPad app, and I think you've got something really cool going on there with their ecosystem. So I'm not sure exactly what the solution is there, but it seems like that is an area where there could be some improvement. Yeah, so that's my list of 10 things. What would you love to see Procreate do that maybe Adobe is already doing? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.